The wind in Dry Creek carried memories like prayers, brittle, half-broken, meant for no one in particular. It ran across the plains, through the bones of fence posts and the dry whisper wheat, stirring the air until even the sun seemed to waver. Evangeline Harrow stood in that wind, her skirt clinging to her legs, her hands raw from hanging laundry that never truly dried. The house behind her sagged as if it, too, were tired of standing. It had once been her father's pride, but now the roof leaked, the porch sagged, and the paint peeled in pale strips, like a skin the world had outgrown. She'd been alone since spring, since the day they carried her father down the hill to the churchyard and left her with his debts, his boots, and the soft rumor of disgrace. Folks said he'd drunk himself empty. She knew better. Shame had taken him faster than whiskey ever could. In a town that measured worth in cattle and acres, a man's failure was as loud as a gunshot. She had spent the summer paying for his mistakes in whispers and glances, gossip that followed her like a stray dog, nipping quietly at her heels. That evening, the light went gold and slow. The dust turned into a haze that glowed like ashen firelight, and she felt the air change, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm or a reckoning. When she looked up, she saw a dark shape cresting the ridge, a rider, cutting through the horizon as if carved from shadow. The horse was black as midnight creek water, its mane streaming wild, and the man riding it sat tall and unhurried, as if time itself moved aside for him. Cole Thatcher. The name carried through Dry Creek like the sound of spurs on wood, sharp, sure, and hard to ignore. He was the only son of Grant Thatcher, the richest cattleman this side of the desert. People said Cole had gone to war and come back without laughter, without softness. He carried his father's wealth like a wound in his own silence, like armor, and now he was coming for her. By the time he reached her gate, the air had gone still enough to hear the crickets stop. He dismounted and tipped his hat slightly, more respect than most would offer her these days. "Miss Harrow," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I reckon you know why I'm here." She didn't answer right away. The setting sun painted his face in copper and shadow, and she thought for a heartbeat that he looked almost kind. Then she remembered who he was. "You've come to collect my father's sins," she said. He blinked once, slow. "Just as debts." Her mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Same thing where I come from." He shifted his weight, gloved fingers brushing the brim of his hat. "There's paperwork. Land notes signed in your father's hand. My father sent me to settle it fair." "Your father doesn't do fair," she said. "No," he admitted after a pause. "He doesn't." His gaze moved over the yard, the leaning barn, the dead field, the worn clothesline swaying in the wind. "But I do things my own way. You'll forgive me if I don't believe that, Mr. Thatcher." The wind blew between them, dry and cool, around the bend of the road. Two boys from town stood pretending not to watch. Eva's cheeks burned. "You can tell your father he'll get nothing from me," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray her exhaustion. "I can't do that," he said, calm but not cruel. "But maybe there's another way." She folded her arms, though her heart thudded in her chest. "And what's that?" "Come work it off. My ranch needs hands. You'd have wages, a roof, and in time, your debt cleared." She almost laughed. "So you mean to buy my pride cheap?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't buy pride. I've got none left myself." That silenced her. The sun dipped lower, and the wind shifted. She saw something unguarded in him then, not arrogance, but weariness. A man carrying something he couldn't name. She said softly, "You could hate me, Mr. Thatcher." He looked straight into her eyes. "You prefer that?" The air between them tightened. A shutter banged against the house, slow and steady. Neither moved. At last she said, "If it's work you offer, I'll take it, but not your pity. I won't wear that." He nodded once. "You'll have your say, Miss Harrow." He reached into his coat and handed her the paper, creased, official, and cold. Her father's signature curled at the bottom like a ghost's whisper. She didn't look at it long. Some things you didn't need to see to understand their weight. By the time he turned back toward his horse, the first stars had begun to show. He stopped at the gate. "We leave at dawn," he said. She didn't answer, only watched him ride into the dark. The sound of hooves faded slow, like the heart settling after a fright. That night, she sat by the dying fire, staring at the boots her father had left behind. The house sighed with every gust of wind. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled, a deep, restless sound. She thought of Cole Thatcher and his measured words, of the offer she'd accepted without understanding why. Maybe it wasn't pride that drove her anymore, but the need to stand somewhere new, even if the ground wasn't hers. When morning came, the town woke hungry for talk. Widow Pike saw her saddle her father's horse and nearly ran to spread the word. "Eva Harrow's gone with a Thatcher," she hissed at the baker's wife, off to pay her debts the old-fashioned way. By noon, every porch in Dry Creek had an opinion, and every man at the saloon had a smirk. Sheriff Boone came riding out before she left. His eyes, kind but tired, searched her face. "You sure about this, Eva?" "I don't see much else worth staying for," she said. "Thatcher blood don't mix easy," he warned. "Neither does Harrow blood," she replied, cinching the strap tight on her horse. He watched her for a long time, then nodded. "Your mother was proud," he said. "Don't let them take that from you." She gave him a faint smile. "They can talk all they want. Talking's easier than living." Then she turned toward the horizon, where the dust still rose from Cole's trail. The ride-out was quiet. The field shimmered with heat, and the air tasted of iron and memory. She followed him at a small distance, her mind a tangle of fear and strange calm. The land unfurled around them, endless and unkind. At one point, her horse stumbled, and Cole slowed, glancing back without a word. The gesture, small, almost reluctant, was the first kindness she'd been shown in months. She didn't thank him, but she noticed. They rode like that for miles, neither speaking, the sound of hooves like a heartbeat in the dry earth. The sun lower behind them, staining the sky with copper and violet, the kind of color that makes silence holy. When the last ridge came and the valley opened up wide below, Eva slowed. Her home was only a faint smudge now, the house barely standing, the field already claimed by shadow. For a moment, she wanted to turn back. Not for what was there, but for the girl she'd been while it still stood. Cole stopped beside her, his voice soft against the wind. "You all right?" She didn't look at him. "That depends on where you're taking me." "Home," he said after a long pause. The word hung between them like a promise neither quite trusted. She let it settle, uncertain, but didn't challenge it. Instead, she nudged her horse forward, the rhythm of its steps carrying her into the deepening dusk. Behind them, the last light clung to the horizon, then slipped away completely. And in that moment, as darkness swallowed the plain, something inside her shifted. Not hope, not yet, but a stirring of something older and quieter, a memory of belonging, a spark that hadn't gone out after all. They kept riding until the stars rose clear, until the road was only a silver thread under the moon. Neither spoke again, but when the wind moved, carrying the scent of rain, she thought she heard a voice, his maybe, or her father's, or the land itself, whisper, "Come with me." And she did. The morning after they reached the Thatcher ranch, the sun broke over the hills like a blade, cutting light through the mist. The world smelled of dust and dew, and Eva found herself standing in the yard with her skirts tucked up, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching the hands already at work. No one spoke to her. They didn't have to. Their glances said enough. Half pity, half curiosity. A woman from a fallen family didn't last long on a place like this. Cole had shown her the bunkhouse, though she'd refused it, saying she'd take the small shack near the creek instead. He didn't argue. He'd only nodded and left her to it. The shack smelled of old wood and damp straw, but it was her space, and that was something. By mid-morning, she was working. Her hands blistered on the shovel. Her shoulders burned in the sun, and every breath felt like grit. But it was honest work. For the first time in months, her body had something to do besides remember. Cole passed through the fields now and then, quiet, watchful, speaking only when he needed to. There was something about him that reminded her of the land, stubborn, vast, and slow to give anything away. Once, she caught him watching her as she fixed a broken fence post. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but she felt the weight of his gaze all the same. He said nothing, only turned away, the faintest touch of respect in the tilt of his head. Days blurred into each other. The rhythm of the ranch took her in. The creak of saddles before dawn, the smell of sweat and horsehide, the sound of boots on the porch after dark. At night, she'd sit outside the shack and listen to the river nearby, the way it whispered over stones. Sometimes she thought she heard music in it, like her mother's old piano, soft and almost remembered. She began to see things she hadn't noticed before, the grace in small survival, a stable boy leaving extra oats for her horse, the cook saving her coffee even when she came late, and Cole moving through it all like a man at war with his own silence. One night a storm came. The sky darkened early, thick with clouds that looked heavy enough to crush the earth. The men hurried to stable the horses, cursing at the thunder. Eva ran across the yard, hair whipping against her face, skirts dragging through mud. Lightning split the distance, and for a moment she saw Cole at the barn door, holding it open, calling her name. She didn't hear him, but she saw the shape of his hand reaching out. When she stumbled in, drenched and shaking, he pulled the door closed behind her. The thunder rolled like a cannon overhead. "Are you all right?" he asked. His hair was wet, his voice rough. She nodded, breathless. "The horses, they're safe," he said. "You did good." Rain drummed on the roof, hard and steady. The air was thick with the smell of hay and wet leather. For a long time neither spoke. Then softly she said, "You could have stayed inside." He looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. "So could you." The silence that followed was different, close, almost fragile. She could feel the warmth of him even across the space between them. Her heart beat unevenly, like a bird trying to find its wings again. She sat on a bale of hay, brushing mud from her skirt. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "But I never do." "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because I don't know who I'd be if I did." She understood that. Maybe that's why she hadn't run from him. Even when every voice in town had told her to, there was something in him, an emptiness that mirrored her own. And sometimes, she thought, two broken things could make a kind of whole. When the storm eased, he walked her back to the shack. The air was cool, the ground slick with mud. They didn't speak, but when they reached her door, he paused. "You should rest," he said. She opened the door, but before stepping inside, she turned. "You're not what they say you are," she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Neither are you." Then he tipped his hat, just a little, and walked away into the dark. After that night, something changed. The men still talked, and the town still whispered, but she no longer cared. The work grew easier, the world softer at its edges. Some mornings, Cole rode beside her as she drove the cattle out. They rarely spoke, but in their silence there was an understanding that words would only spoil. Then, one afternoon, the world turned cruel again. A wagon came from town, carrying Widow Pike and the preacher's wife. They stood in the yard, faces drawn with false concern. "We only came to check on you," Widow Pike said sweetly. "A young woman living under a man's roof. People might talk." "They already do," Eva said, keeping her voice steady. "It's not too late to save your reputation," the preacher's wife added. "Come back to town. Find honest work." Eva smiled, thin and sharp. Honest work doesn't live in Dry Creek anymore. The women left with tight mouths and judgment in their eyes. She watched their wagon disappear down the road, then turned to find Cole standing near the porch, arms crossed. "They'll never let you be," he said quietly. "Let them talk," she replied. "They need something to do." He looked at her for a long time, then reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. Inside was a folded paper, her father's deed, cleared of debt, her name alone written at the bottom. "I had it drawn up last week," he said. "You don't owe a thing anymore." She stared at it, hands trembling. "Why would you do this?" He shifted, as if the question pained him. "Because your father's name deserves rest. And so do you." Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She folded the paper carefully and held it to her chest. "You think this makes us even?" He met her gaze. "I don't believe there's such a thing as even." The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of rain again. She felt something uncoil inside her, a knot of grief, pride, and fear slowly coming undone. A week later, she asked him to ride with her out to the old Harrow land. The fields lay quiet, golden with wild grass. The house still leaned, stubborn against the wind. They stood at the fence line, side by side, watching the light shift across the valley. "It's smaller than I remember," she said. He nodded. "Everything is when you stop running from it." A storm gathered behind the mountains, slow and patient. The first drops fell, cool against their skin. She turned to him, and for the first time, reached out. Her hand found his, uncertain but sure. He didn't move. He only looked at her, the rain tracing silver lines down his face. "I don't hate you," she whispered. "I didn't think you did," he said. Lightning flashed behind them, bright enough to turn the world white for an instant. When the light faded, they were still standing there, hands joined, the land breathing around them like something newly born. They didn't kiss. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter, truer, the kind that settles deep in the heart and stays. Months passed. The town grew used to her absence. The gossip dulled into silence. Eva rebuilt the Harrow place slowly, planting wildflowers where wheat once grew. Cole visited sometimes, never for long. They talked of weather, fences, and the river's changing course. But their eyes said more than any of it. The ache between them never quite left, but it no longer hurt. It was simply part of the landscape now, like the wind of the mountains, something eternal, quietly understood. One evening, she watched him ride away down the long dirt road, the sun catching on the silver buckle of his saddle. She stood on the porch, hands clasped, heart steady. She knew he'd come back. Maybe not soon, but someday, and if he didn't, that was all right too, because she'd found something greater than love, peace. As the light faded, she knelt in the dirt and touched the first wildflower blooming beside the step. It was small and pale, trembling in the wind, but it had chosen to live there anyway. She smiled. The world, she thought, has a quiet way of forgiving us. And if you've ever carried a name that felt like a debt, remember this. Redemption doesn't always arrive with thunder or a kiss. Sometimes it comes softly, in the shape of an open hand, or a man who looks at you and sees not what you were, but what you still could be. The heart heals like the land after rain, slow, stubborn, and full of wildflowers.